Alright, here we are back at Signum Academy on Twitch. This is Wesley. I hope you all had a good holiday. Looking forward to jumping back in with 3 new authors this year. 2 of them are relatively new to me. I've never read anything by Rosemary Sutcliffe before. I've read just one Ella Montgomery book, and I've read a little bit of Tove Jansson, and I'm looking forward to reading a few new books by her as well. These are the authors we're going to focus on this year. And Rosemary Sutcliffe was actually a recommendation that somebody posted in the stream, the Twitch chat here. So my Twitch looks like this. I think yours looks a little different, but you should have a little chat box there. I hope that you will be posting in there, and if not in that, if you're watching this later, you can always send us emails at Signum Academy. I meant to have that up. We have got a new website as of I guess a little before the holidays that I was showing off to you guys. You'll see that we've got a few new programs running, a few new clubs that you can check out, and I hope that you'll at least send in ideas and questions. If you're not sure about what we're up to over on Signum Academy, just we'd love to hear from you. And if you have suggestions, if you have an interest in the, as we put it here, extracurricular educational activities for young people. In case that doesn't make sense to you, if you are maybe a younger person, basically we want to talk to you about books and languages, especially fantasy and ancient languages, but also things that people still are up to nowadays. So Spanish, Conversation Club is one of the languages that we're going to be focusing on too. If you love writing and reading, this is a great place for you to explore. All right. So, as I said, it was one of the viewers on Twitch who posted the suggestion to check out Rosemary Sutcliffe. She was a new author for me. It seems like she's better known in the UK, so in England and Great Britain. She's got a lovely website here. I took a picture from it to use in our slides here, but I just wanted to show you her website first so that you can check this out. And there's a tab about her life. So it's written by her godson, cousin, and the person in charge of her books and stories at this point. So there's a bunch of copies of the books listed up here. Over here on the side you see Beowulf, and that's one we're going to focus on today and next time as well. So this quote comes from an article of The Minstrel Kind by Margaret Meek. She writes, the details of Rosemary's early years and her amazing resourcefulness in the face of crippling pain are given with no trace of self-pity in her autobiographical narrative, Blue Remembered Hills. There's also a revealing paragraph in a collection of stories she edited with Monica Dickens, Is Anyone There?, where she says, quote, I had a lonely childhood and growing up time. My parents loved me and I loved them, but I could never talk to them about the problems and fears and aching hopes inside me that I had most need to talk about to someone. And there was no one else. I found that such an interesting quote, even though it's pulled out here and it's kind of taken out of its original context. It spoke really powerfully to me, the feeling of being alone, not having anyone to talk to, not being able to talk to your parents, perhaps, about, as she puts it, fears and aching hopes and problems. So the kinds of problems that she's dealing with might not be exactly the same ones that I had or that you have, but you can probably relate to that feeling anyway. So she eventually becomes a very prolific writer. She writes a ton of books. Many are very well received. She's awarded the Carnegie Medal for her book, The Lantern Bearers. And many of her books do focus on Britain and British history. But she does have some that go into some other interesting directions here. So that book, Blue Remembered Hills, I was looking at it. I think I've showed you guys this website before too, archive.org. You can basically check out books on here for just a short period of time. So this is very short, but long enough to check out. So where does Beowulf come up in her life? That's what I was curious about. So I'm giving you guys kind of a window into what I do when I'm trying to find out about a book or an author. So if they've got a website, that's probably good information. I found this via listening to a podcast because that's a way that I like hearing new things. So I listened to a good podcast about her documentary on a program called, I think it's called Coffee and Circuses, which I hadn't heard of before, but just searching. And then I saw, and hear about this book, Blue Remembered Hills. I'd seen that come up a few times, so I thought I should check out that book itself and kind of get her story directly. And again, getting this more in context of her life. So Beowulf comes up, it looks like the word is mentioned anyway 4 times in the book. So I kind of jumped to those places since we're looking at Beowulf for today. And I'm sorry if you can't see the text that well, but I can read it for you here. So the first time is she lives near some marshes, marshy wet land, and they go out for drives with someone she calls the commander, Commander Bishop. And she says, even now, any sudden mist coming down brings the story and its own particular atmosphere back into my mind. Stories he would tell. The great fumbling figures, terrible and yet in some way pathetic, out of the mist, made of denser mist, pawing round the thresholds of living people. So that's a really great image. I don't know if where you live you get mists and fogs. I live kind of close to a river, the Spokane River, and every so often a heavy fog will descend, and so that kind of mysterious atmosphere that you get in much the same way. In much that way, she says, I felt later when my mother first read Beowulf to me. Grendel must have come up from his marsh mists, pawing and snuffling round the doors of Heorot, hating the firelight and the harp song that he longed to share, and the smell of man, capital M, man, meaning human beings. And when I came to write my own retelling of Beowulf, Commander Bishop's story had a little part to play in it. So I find this like a really interesting mention quite early in the biography, her memoirs. She mentions having this connection, something she experienced, and associating it with the story of Beowulf, and specifically this monster creature, Grendel. On the one hand, terrifying. On the other hand, kind of pathetic, right? A physical thing, but also kind of a mist creature, something out of the imagination, as much as it is out of nature. So there's a story that her mom would later tell her, and I think that's probably important too. So she gets the story of Beowulf told to her, read to her, before she reads it. Then she describes when she's learning to read herself, she's given a story that is just not interesting to her. She says she's about 6, and she hated this story because she wanted something more like Beowulf in the darkened hall of Heorot. Right? And I can't tell you why Heorot is spelled that way. I'm not sure, because it's not spelled that way in the actual story, as we'll see. But anyway, the last mention of Beowulf comes towards the end, when she's coming up to the point where she's starting to become a writer herself. She says she was working on a book which she was intending for children, a retelling of Celtic and Saxon legends, on which my mother had brought me up. Beowulf, Cuchulainn, Geraint and Enid, Gawain and the Loathly Lady, about a dozen in all. So we'll hear about some of these other ones. Not the Cuchulainn. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. That's an Irish story, I think. But Geraint and Gawain and their ladies, Enid and the Loathly Lady, we will see them and we'll meet them again in the next few books that we're going to read from Rosemary Sutcliffe. Those are Arthurian, as in King Arthur stories. So she was putting together a story collection. What she was working on here. So what I've heard about Rosemary Sutcliffe is that she was very artistic, very bright, obviously, very loved, but had a difficult childhood. And this might remind you, just to jump to our slides here, of another author who's fascinated by Beowulf and ends up retelling it in his own way. And that, of course, is Tolkien. So here at Signum, we love Tolkien. We're all about Tolkien. So I wanted to make that connection up front here. Why I chose Beowulf out of all the stories by Rosemary Sutcliffe, I thought it had a nice connection back to kind of the core material that we started from with this project. Tolkien obviously is a professor and tells this story by starting out in the Old English. He starts speaking, declaiming, chanting the Old English or Anglo-Saxon poetry. And I've heard people say that they think he did this to try to scare away his students, so he wouldn't have as many students to deal with. I don't know if that's true. That's maybe a little joke, but maybe. But Rosemary Sutcliffe, very, very different approach to this story. Does not go in much for the Old English. I don't think she would have heard the Old English first. She would have heard it from her mom reading her some version of the story. So it seems like she's writing this story for kids right up front. And Tolkien has a version like that. His Selic spell is a kind of fairy tale reimagining, imagining the story behind Beowulf, perhaps. And I suppose he probably told some version of that to his kids. And the other thing you'll notice about Rosemary Sutcliffe's Beowulf, it's got these awesome drawings. I really like the illustrations. I love Tolkien's art, of course, too. But Tolkien's doing a different thing with his kind of intricate, very painstaking dragon here, as opposed to this really rough-looking, very vibrant, kind of active Beowulf figure. And these drawings are by someone called Charles Keeping. I'm not sure about the ones here. I think this must be a different artist in the Arthur stories that we're going to check out next. So this month is all Beowulf. So we'll talk a bit about it this time, give you kind of overview of what we're up to. I hope you have time to read it before our next meeting, because we'll go more into the story next time. But do also be searching out these books. So The Sword in the Circle is the first in the series. Then we get The Light Beyond the Forest and The Road to Camlan. These are a trilogy in which Rosemary Sutcliffe retells some of the major King Arthur stories. We'll talk about her sources for those. So we'll do Sword in the Circle for February, then Light Beyond the Forest, and The Road to Camlan over the next few months. Do I have that right? Could be mixing things up here. I noticed the website is still not updated, so I'll have to get in touch with our website updating people about that. But I'll try to get that up there for you. Oh. I wonder if you guys are seeing me. Sorry. My video wasn't working for a second. So I just had to reload this page. Pop in the chat there and let me know if anything's up with the video. Oh, okay. Philip says, yeah, I can see it. Great, great. Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah. So if you guys have more questions about kind of Rosemary, Sutcliffe, Beowulf, and then the next few sessions, just let me know here. Cool. So again, back to Rosemary Sutcliffe herself. So this is that picture that I found that I really liked from the website. They had kind of zoomed in on her face, and maybe it was a slightly different version of this photo. But you can see her in her study here, with her books at her desk, with all her papers. Looks like some stuffed animals in the background. This awesome lamp, these cool curtains. It just looks like such a great place to work. And I don't know about y'all, but that's something I really struggle with when I'm trying to do work and do, productive things, is just having a space set aside for it. And I'm sure with being stuck at home a lot of people are going through this. So I recently put together a little desk space for myself back in our laundry room, actually, because it's the only room in the house that other people don't go in very much. So I can kind of hide back there and do some work once in a while. But the podcast I was listening to describes how she would come in, she would answer all of her letters and read all her letters and things first off, read the paper, and then get down to work and write all morning. So she was a really hard worker. As I mentioned, she wrote a ton of books, so she was very productive, very prolific as an author. She did deal with childhood illness. I think it's called Still's disease, and you'll see her hands are deformed. They're not able to move very much, and she struggled with a lot of loneliness as a child. She was not in school very much. Apparently, she had to move around a lot because of her dad being in the Navy. Her mother apparently struggled with some mental health issues, and just was very it was a very complicated upbringing. It sounds like, and she mentions there being alone, being very lonely. So she becomes a painter first, actually, and is very good at it. Apparently, very skilled, very well taught. But then shifts over into writing instead. She has a lot of stories that she wants to tell. She wants to connect with people in that way. And a lot of her stories are these retellings. So she's most famous for historical fiction. Again, set in Great Britain. The Eagle of the Ninth, I think, is the most famous book. And I don't know if you all have read that one. Oh, okay. Philip mentions The Shining Company. And he says they once filled their desk with teddy bears too. Yes, yes. Whatever helps you focus and get through your work. So The Shining Company, The Eagle of the Ninth, I think they might be part of the same series. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, a lot of her books tell stories of ancient people who lived in the British Isles, and dealing with the connections between, say, the Roman Empire and the native or the people who were in the British Isles at that point, who maybe had pushed someone else out, right? So her own story of growing up, as we mentioned, is told in a book called Blue Remembered Hills. That's her memories, her memoirs, and quite beautifully written from the little that I've read. Should be really interesting, and I do mean to read a bit more of that before next time, so I can get a better picture of her overall, again, sort of the context, right? What's going on around her, that then we can shift into seeing how her stories are helping her deal with some of that. So with the remaining time here, maybe 10-20 minutes or so, I do want to give kind of a overview of Beowulf for people who are maybe reading it for the first time, or if you've read it in some other version, kind of what's different about Rosemary Sutcliffe's Beowulf. So again, I've got these pictures that I pulled out from Charles Keeping that are in the version that I was reading, which I really liked. So this first one it shows us the Coast Guard, and that's Beowulf and his men on his ship arriving in the land where his first adventure is going to be recounted. So in the Beowulf story, we've kind of got these three big challenges, big battles that make Beowulf into the hero of the overall poem or story. Now, as I mentioned, Tolkien is way more invested in the original form that comes down in Old English manuscript. And I have studied that a bit at Signum. If you guys are interested in learning Old English, again, you should check out the Signum Academy Club or even the Signum University classes. You can just listen to the recordings of those, or you can take them when they're offered live. Really great experience, but quite difficult. So just kind of know what you're up against there. Old English is not like the English we speak now. There are some words that do sound similar. So in the original poem, we don't start out with Beowulf. Instead, we start out with a kind of mythical hero from the past called Sheaf, Chafing, and Shield Chafing, Shield Chafing. And I think one of his ancestors is Sheaf, or one of his descendants is Sheaf. Anyway, getting it all mixed up. I'm so sorry. But we start with this kind of introduction to the poem about this totally different character. And the poem, that part of it winds up by saying, it describes how he basically battles all these other tribes whose names are kind of mixed up and we're not sure who they are exactly. He forced them to pay tribute. He had his band of warriors and would basically, like Vikings, these kind of Viking ships, go in and raid and cause ruckus, overthrow their tables and burn down their villages and all this. And then it winds up by saying, that was a good king. And that phrase, that was good kinning, you can pretty much hear what it means from the Old English. But anyway, Rosemary Sutcliffe starts her story with Beowulf, and with him hearing about this trouble at the Hall of Heorot, which just means the heart, or the deer. He goes at once to rescue the people there from the monster that's oppressing them, destroying their joy. And he is arriving here. This is kind of his debut as a great warrior. And we see the perspective of the people there as they observe him arriving. So the Coast Guard, or the warden, is not sure at first, right? Are these people coming to raid and battle, or are they coming for a friendly reason, right? And he is wise, and he can tell that they are actually there for something kind to the king. So we should kind of think about this kind of arrival of the heroes and not being sure what to make of them at first. We can think about this in the context, say, of Tolkien's Two Towers, where the king Aragorn, right, who is undercover, he comes and has to make his way in to talk to Theoden, right? It's kind of an interesting parallel that a lot of people draw between Beowulf and Tolkien's work. Again, Rosemary Sutcliffe, kind of very straightforward presentation of the story. And as Beowulf comes in, sure enough, Grendel, the monster from the mists, shows up, kills one of his men immediately, but then Beowulf springs up, grabs onto Grendel's arm, and they wrestle and wrestle, and Grendel's terrified and running away, actually wrenches his arm out of its socket. So that's what's depicted here. So spoilers, Beowulf wins that fight with Grendel quite, shall we say, handily, quite easily. It's a very gruesome image, but then they take the arm and they nail it up onto the gable of the roof of the mead hall, this beautiful hall that has been that they've been unable to use because the monster keeps attacking. And then they feast and they have a great party with that arm just hanging up above as a trophy, as a sign that Beowulf has triumphed. It's very interesting. So what we learn about Beowulf there, he truly has the strength of 30 men in his grip. He fights without weapons, because weapons wouldn't work against a monster like Grendel, we're told. Instead, he grapples with his bare hands. And interestingly, I think you can sort of see pretty quickly, Beowulf is a scary guy. He's a frightening person. There's a kind of interesting parallel, right, between Beowulf and his men even. The man who's killed is called Hanshu, which means like glove. So there's this like hand thing going on. Beowulf's hand with the strength of 30. Grendel losing his arm. There's this interesting kind of like transference of fear and power, strength, and pity also, right? As we mentioned, Grendel to Rosemary Sutcliffe is a kind of sympathetic character, a pitiful figure, pathetic figure. And Beowulf actually starts to look a little bit like a monster. You know, even the way he's depicted here is very threatening, very aggressive. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, so Philip mentions he says, first came across Rosemary's work with picture books, versions of Iliad and Odyssey, that she did with Alan Lee. Yeah, I saw those too. I was tempted to read those actually with y'all. But I figured Beowulf would stick more closely to the kind of material that we'd been doing. Yeah, Philip, what did you think of those books? Would you recommend the Iliad and Odyssey retellings that she does? I know those are really crucial, really great stories. And I imagine the Alan Lee illustrations are very beautiful as well. I think the Iliad one is called Black Ships Before Troy. And then the other one, I think, is just The Wanderings of Odysseus. But yeah, y'all can find those out there. That would probably be a good introduction to those stories. If that's your first time getting the Iliad and Odyssey, the Fall of Troy, The Wanderings of Odysseus, those stories. But yeah, I'd be interested in what you thought of those. And yeah, if you don't know the Beowulf story, I am going to spoil it a bit. I don't know if you can spoil these stories, honestly. Like, the theory is that everyone hearing these stories would have known basically what they were about. You would have gotten these, from your mom and dad or whatever. You've been told these stories growing up. So everyone sort of knows the story, and it's more about the way the person tells it and the feelings that the story evokes as you go through these well-known tales. And that's kind of what I'm trying to provide for people here. So don't think of these as spoilers, please. Think of them more as those signposts for you, those key moments to just watch out for and to enjoy when you come to them. So this moment is a sad one. I think I can find this, actually. I wanted to read some of Rosemary Sutcliffe's writing. We'll read more of it next time. But I think the character's name is Asher. This might be a way to find it more quickly. So this is the moment, when Hrothgar, the king, and his close counselor Asher, his shoulder-to-shoulder man, as he describes him, is killed. By whom? By Grendel's mother. So the mother takes revenge when her son is killed. Okay. So as we come to this, here we go. The description. Okay, here we go. Yeah, the description of the place where Grendel's mother has taken refuge. Far down the coast from the fjord with its shingle strand, where the Geatish war galley lay behind her barricade of oars, was a very different place. A sea inlet between two steep nesses, with a narrow opening to the sea outside. Along the base of the cliffs lay black shelving rocks, where the sea beasts basked at noontide, and others that were jagged and fanged like sea beasts themselves. And the waves of the open sea, driven into the confined space, boiled and weltered as in a cauldron. At the landward end of this evil place, a stream coming down from the high moors had cut for itself through the years a deep gorge, overhung with a tangle of sere and salt-burned trees that dripped grey lichen into the grey mists of the falling water, and the spume that beat up from the churning waves below. A place of ill omen. A dreadful place of which men told many stories, stories of giant shapes half glimpsed in the sea mists, of strange sounds echoing and strange lights flaring beneath the water, and storms that blew up out of nowhere, and strange tides that set there, while elsewhere along the coast the winds and the tides were fair. Land animals shunned the place, they said, and if a deer, hard-pressed by the hounds, were driven to the edge of the stream, it would turn there on the bank and die, rather than plunge into the water and swim for safety. So just a lovely, intense description of this terrifying place where the sea and the land meet, where fire and water, strange lights under the water, and where this monster's mother, even more terrifying than Grendel himself, Grendel's mother has her home, has her abode. So this image here is the King Hrothgar finding the head of his companion Asher above that cliff before Grendel's mother is dealt with by Beowulf too. So again, there's a kind of interesting, remember the arm that they hung up above their house, right? And so here she puts the head up above her house. It's unclear whether she puts it there as a sign or she just leaves it there. But anyway, very ominous, a lot of anticipation for this moment. So Philip's 7. It was a while ago I read them, but I actually enjoyed them. Did them instead of the actual books for high school. Would definitely recommend them. Yeah, so liking that description. Yeah, it's throughout this book, the landscape descriptions, the descriptions of the people. So along with the Coast Guard, you actually get a description of all the townspeople, the villagers. Get lovely descriptions of the mead hall and the women coming out and passing the mead horn, right? The drink around, and everyone kind of coming together, singing songs. You really get a feel for the reality behind these kind of mythic and legendary stories. Again, Rosemary Sutcliffe, really great at bringing that history to life in her writing. So, part 2 of Beowulf's story, going down into the depths of the sea, attacked by all these beasts, and he finds Grendel's mother there. They have their battle in her home, right, on her turf this time. And it is a very close struggle. She's got a knife that she's jabbing into him, but he's got his battle armor on. He grapples with her. He tries using the sword that Unferth, the unfriend, gave him. They kind of have this rivalry, and Unferth tries to give him a good sword to use, but the sword is no good. It bounces off, it breaks. And so Beowulf's in trouble, but he reaches around and finds a giant sword down there in the cavern of Grendel's mother. We're told it's a sword from the days of giants. And sure enough, it's magic and is able to hack off Grendel's mother's head. It boils up the blood from her. It's venomous, and it eats away at the sword itself, but the hilt is left. And so Beowulf brings back this treasure of the hilt, brings back the head of Grendel's mother. Or is it, maybe it's Grendel himself that he cuts the head off and brings back? I can't remember which head he brings back. Anyway, he kills the mother. He finds the body of Grendel. He hacks off the head of Grendel. We're really sure that they're dead this time. It's very gruesome, very violent. And again, there's something interesting going on there about the kind of weapons that can kill a monster like this. It's not a human weapon, right? It's an ancient mythical weapon. It's a weapon made by giants in the old days. In the poem, I remember it's described, there's a kind of writing on the sword itself. So it's a runic, script. It's magical. It even sort of reflects the power of language itself, perhaps, as a weapon, right? The pen is mightier than the sword, they say, right? The power of the words to overcome an evil foe, and specifically ancient words. So I think that's really important. And we'll go into this again more next time, more into the Beowulf story and what's going on with that. But I love that Rosemary Sutcliffe includes these details, the kind of key moments. They all come through in her retelling. And again, this drawing is just awesome. You can see they're locked in this struggle, but it's almost kind of like a dance also. We don't see the face of Grendel's mother. She's trying to bite into him, trying to stab into him. She's just this force of nature. But at the same time, sympathetic, right? She wanted revenge for her child, for her son Grendel. And that's a huge kind of motivation throughout these old stories, is that theme of getting back at somebody, getting vengeance, getting justice, if that's how you want to think about it. Anyway, getting what's yours. And she's defeated. And I think this might be a picture from something else. I'm not sure if this is the same artist, honestly. I don't remember now if this makes an appearance later in the book. But the third moment, and the one that gives its kind of subtitle to Rosemary Sutcliffe's version, is Beowulf fighting the dragon. And I think what we're seeing represented in this picture is that he dies. So Beowulf is a great hero. He has the strength of 30 men. He's super strong. He's super stamina, super endurance to fight and dive deep underwater and survive the cold and the fire. But the dragon does him in the end. He kills the dragon with help from one of his men, but the dragon also kills him. And there's a kind of finality to this that goes beyond Beowulf himself. It's not just Beowulf that dies at the end. It's strongly suggested that his whole people, the Geats, remember, or Geats, the Geatish people, are not going to survive without their king. So we'll look next time, more about Beowulf's character. What kind of a person is he? What is he up to in this story? Why does he make the choices that he does? And particularly at the end of the story, how his battle with the dragon, again, sort of translates into some bigger picture of what's going on with his people. These are things that, again, come through really nicely in Rosemary Sutcliffe's story, her retelling of the story. They're really important themes, the kind of death and heroism that come into Tolkien's writing too, and that Tolkien is really drawing on from Beowulf. I think we talked about that maybe last year when we were looking at Tolkien, but we'll revisit that a bit next time too, so we can see how these things kind of connect together. All right, and as mentioned, after that, next month we're going to start those King Arthur stories. So I found a cool manuscript block there to give you a look at what that's going to be like. But of course, we're not going to read them in Old or Middle English or whatever it is. We're going to read them in Rosemary Sutcliffe's retellings. Okay? So, yeah. Oh, right. So talking about the immersive descriptions, noticing that in The Shining Company too, Philip says, there are descriptions like she's telling you about a place she had been to herself. Yeah, absolutely. She seems really connected to these locations, or at least she's drawing on the kind of landscapes that she has experienced herself. So like going out in the marshes, right? She's pulling on some of that material and putting it into her version of the story. Because, of course, one of the really strange things about the Beowulf story, although it's kind of the Old English legend, it doesn't take place in England or in the British Isles at all. It takes place over in Scandinavia and Germanic waters. So that's weird, and that's something we'll kind of look at next time. Is what's so English about Beowulf in the first place, and what's going on with his connection to the land of England, which Rosemary Sutcliffe and Tolkien both very invested in, very, very important to them, and definitely comes up in her other stories as well. So I hope you guys will be reading more Rosemary Sutcliffe. It looks like The Shining Company is one of her last books. According to this, it comes out back in 1990, so very late in her life. Last year, 2020, was actually the centennial of her birth. She was born in 1920. Forgot to mention that. So maybe that's part of the reason that Rosemary Sutcliffe is kind of back in the limelight a little bit. I'm not sure exactly how other people have heard about her, but I'm very grateful to have encountered this writer, heard about her through doing the Signum Academy on Twitch here. So thanks to you all. Thanks for watching and listening. Again, if you have other questions that come to you later or as you're reading or whatever, send them in. Find us on our website. Send us emails. Send us comments and questions, and I'll be happy to respond to those. We'll meet in 2 weeks then, so not next Monday, but the one after that. So it's first and third Mondays of every month here on Twitch. If there's no other questions or comments for now, I'll let you all go. Thanks again, and happy reading.